Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Crawford gripped the control yoke of the B-17 as the formation of heavy bombers cut through the gray European sky. It was March 15, 1944, and this would be the 25th mission for his crew, the last one before they could finally go home. The number 25 had taken on an almost mythical quality among bomber crews. Complete 25 missions, and you earned your ticket home. But the odds were brutally against them. Most crews didn't make it past their 5th mission. Beside him, co-pilot Tom Reeves checked the instruments with a methodical precision that had saved their lives on more than one occasion. Tom was from Boston, a former accountant who brought the same meticulous attention to detail to flying that he'd once applied to balance sheets. They'd been through hell together: Bremen, Berlin, Frankfurt. Each mission had taken something from them, but they'd survived. Jimmy glanced out the side window and saw dozens of flying fortresses in tight formation, their bellies laden with tons of bombs destined for a ball-bearing factory in Schweinfurt. Each plane carried 10 men, each man with his own hopes of making it back to base, back to England, back to life. Back to sweethearts waiting in small American towns. Back to parents who checked the mailbox every day with dread and hope in equal measure. The morning briefing had been somber. The intelligence officer had pulled back the curtain to reveal the red string stretching deep into Germany. Schweinfurt. Again. They'd hit it before, and the losses had been staggering. But the factories there produced the ball bearings that kept the Nazi war machine running. Destroy them, and you'd ground the Luftwaffe, stall the panzers. The cockpit was cramped and cold despite the sheepskin-lined flight suits they wore. At 25,000 feet, the temperature hovered around 40 below zero. Ice crystals formed on the windscreen, and Jimmy could see his breath despite the heated suit. Behind him, through the narrow passage, he could hear the crew checking in over the intercom, each voice a reminder of the lives depending on his skill and luck. 15 minutes to target, announced Marcus through the intercom, the bombardier's calm voice contrasting with the tension everyone felt. Marcus lay prone in the plexiglass nose of the aircraft, the most exposed position on the entire plane. He'd been with Jimmy since training in Arizona, a quiet kid from Nebraska who could calculate bombing trajectories in his head faster than most men could with a slide rule. "Enemy fighters, 3 o'clock high!" screamed the tail gunner. Jimmy's heart hammered against his ribs. Bf-109s, sleek, deadly German fighters, sliced through the sky like metallic hawks diving on their prey. The .50 caliber machine guns of the Memphis Belle II roared to life, filling the air with the acrid smell of burnt gunpowder and making the aircraft shudder with recoil. Spent shell casings rained down inside the fuselage, creating a brass symphony of war. "I got one! I got one!" Danny, the waist gunner, celebrated, but his voice was cut short by a violent impact. A 20mm cannon shell tore through the fuselage, ripping away chunks of aluminum like tissue paper. The bomber shuddered violently, and for a terrifying moment, Jimmy thought they were going down. "Engine number 3 on fire." Tom's voice was tense but controlled, years of training keeping panic at bay. "Temperature climbing fast. Oil pressure dropping." Jimmy fought the controls as he shut down the damaged engine and activated the fire suppression system. The heavy bomber lost altitude in a sickening drop, falling away from the formation before Jimmy managed to stabilize it. His arms burned with effort as he wrestled the crippled aircraft back into something resembling level flight. Around them, other B-17s from the formation were falling from the sky, trailing black smoke like wounded birds. White parachutes blossomed like deadly flowers against the gray European sky. Jimmy recognized one of the falling bombers, the Lucky Strike, piloted by his friend from flight school, Charlie Morrison. There were no parachutes coming out of it. The bomber simply fell, tumbling end over end until it disappeared into the clouds below. "Maintain formation," Jimmy ordered over the radio, swallowing the bile rising in his throat. There was no time for grief now. Mourn the dead later. Keep the living alive. The anti-aircraft fire started then, black puffs of flak that erupted around them like malevolent flowers. Each burst was a lethal cloud of shrapnel that could tear a man apart or punch holes in critical systems. The German gunners had their range now, and the sky became a nightmare of explosions and smoke. "Approaching target," Marcus announced, his voice steady as stone. "Stabilizing, stabilizing, steady, steady, bombs away." The B-17 lurched upward as 4,000 pounds of high explosives dropped from the bomb bay. Jimmy watched the factory complex below, a critical target for the Nazi war machine. Orange fireballs bloomed among the buildings, secondary explosions rippling outward. Whatever they'd hit it good. "Let's go home, boys," Jimmy said, banking the heavy bomber westward, toward England, toward safety, toward life. But the ordeal was far from over. With one engine lost, dozens of holes in the fuselage, and hundreds of miles of hostile territory ahead, every minute felt like an eternity. The fuel gauges showed they were burning through their reserves faster than calculated. The tail gunner, hit by shrapnel, was being tended to by the radio operator in the cramped, freezing fuselage. His blood froze on the metal floor. German fighters made one more pass, but the formation's combined firepower drove them off. Still, 2 more bombers went down on that attack. Jimmy recognized the insignia. Good men, men he'd played poker with just the night before. "Coastline in sight," Tom announced, and a collective sigh of relief echoed through the intercom. The English Channel appeared below them, gray and cold but beautiful. It meant they'd made it out of occupied Europe. When the airbase in East Anglia finally appeared ahead, Jimmy allowed himself to breathe. Landing with 3 engines would be tricky, but he'd trained for this. The tower cleared them for emergency landing. He brought the Belle down gently, the tires squealing on the runway. They'd made it. When the crew climbed out, their legs trembled from exhaustion and adrenaline. Jimmy was the last to descend, touching the perforated fuselage of the Belle as if saying goodbye to an old friend. The Memphis Belle II had over 200 bullet and shrapnel holes. Mechanics whistled in disbelief. It was a miracle they'd returned. The maintenance chief, Sergeant O'Brien, shook his head. "You boys used up a lifetime of luck today, Lieutenant." At debriefing, Jimmy reported every detail in a monotone voice, trying not to think about Charlie and the others who didn't make it back. The room smelled of stale coffee and tobacco. Intelligence officers scribbled notes, their faces worn by years of war and loss. 25 missions complete, Tom said later, placing his hand on Jimmy's shoulder as they walked across the base in the darkness of the blackout. "We're going home, Jimmy. Really going home." Jimmy looked at his battered bomber and his crew, all alive, against all odds. Danny had his arm bandaged but was smiling. The tail gunner would be evacuated to a hospital but would survive. Marcus was already writing a letter to his fiancée in Iowa. That night, Jimmy would write letters to the families of the men who didn't return, especially to Sarah Morrison, Charlie's widow at 23. But for now they had survived. They had done their duty. They had become part of that generation that faced hell and returned to tell the story. The war would continue without them, but the Memphis Belle II and her crew had done their part. In the morning, they would board a transport back to the United States, leaving behind the roar of Pratt and Whitney engines, the smell of gunpowder and oil, and the ghosts of so many friends lost in the clouds over Europe.